Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Many thanks for you all joining our Change webinar this afternoon. My name is Rob Austin-Goodall. I'll be moderating this webinar. Thank you so much for those who participated in the chat prior to the commencement of this webinar. There's lots of interesting comments in there. We will be recording this and this will be made available after the session. And there will be a link and some notes in the chat box from my colleague Rachel as we go through this to indicate where you can access the recording from. My colleague Liz Bennett, I'll introduce you now. She'll be presenting the webinar. There's my picture, and then I'll be moderating. Any questions that you have or want to ask, please do so in the chat box. We will try and answer them as swiftly as possible. Or if we can't do it at the time, or Liz can't do it at the time, we'll collate them and do a Q&A at the end of the session. As I say, this will be recorded, so you'll be able to access that later. And what I'll do now is hand over to Liz and to take you through the presentation.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you. And Rob, can you just give me some feedback that you're hearing me okay?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. Yeah, no problem at all.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or wherever you're ringing from the world, whatever time of day it is for you. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you today, and it's delightful to see so many of you here. And thank you for having a go at answering the question that was posed on the very first slide there. And well done. I didn't really expect anybody to know, so I'm delighted that some of you did, and certainly a lot of you were on the right lines. The quote, as Danielle and several others said, is actually from a guy called Klaus Schwab, who was the author of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and it was that he was talking about. He is also the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, so I think I can safely quote him as an expert in this field. And of course, that Fourth Industrial Revolution, the one that we're in now, is really the background, the context for what we're talking about today. Because again, as some of you said, I know Shane, mentioned that you had nailed it. Really, the reason that we've put that up there as our very first slide is because the Fourth Industrial Revolution is bringing changes like we've never seen before. And we have seen plenty of changes over the years. The slide that you're looking at the moment is actually lifted from another book I'm going to quote from Satar Bhawani. And again, I recommend this one. It's eminently readable and very thought-provoking, though his focus is about the sort of leadership we need in Industry 4, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So the background, changes like we've never seen before. You know, Industry 1, late 18th century, steam-enabled transport, mechanical production revolution. Industry 2, electricity driving production, 19th century. Industry 3, the computer-enabled revolution, if you like. 20th century, maybe late 1950s, 1960s, driving Industry 3, and here we are in Industry 4. And Industry 4 is bringing changes that we have never seen before. It's bringing this fusion of disciplines, as you called it in the chat box. It's bringing a combination, some of you mentioned artificial intelligence, it's robotics, it's Internet of Things, it's a system of systems, and it is the many things that we think, actually, what is the world going to be like? And the sort of things that maybe we can now imagine may actually come to fruition. That's certainly what we're seeing now. I don't know how you feel. It's a great time to be alive. There are so much opportunities for change. But of course, the focus of today's session is those opportunities for change also bring challenges. And in order for us to really grasp these changes so that they are changes for the better, we need to develop the right behaviors. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about today. What does change involve? What may Industry 4 drive? What behaviours are going to help us through it? And how can we better support other people? So that really is the agenda for today. What is change? What's the nature of change? I'm not going to go into depth in Industry 4. Of course I'm not. We haven't got time for that. But I'm going to talk about the characteristics of change. I'm going to talk about, we know it's reality. We know it happens. We expect it all of the time. So why is it so difficult sometimes? Is it always difficult? If it is difficult, what can we do about it? And of course, I'm happy to take questions at any stage. You've found the chat box, and if you haven't, it is that orange chat icon at the bottom of your screen there. Post any questions that you've got in the chat box. Rob will be helping me to monitor that. And Rob may interrupt me from time to time to ask if there's a question you've posed that's particularly relevant to what I'm talking about, or we may take them at the end. So use the chat box to interact with me so that you can get what you want to get out of this session. So let's start by talking about the nature of change, as I've called it. And the first dimension I'm going to look at to consider change is very arguably something that you have already used at work. Maybe you're already familiar with this VUCA acronym. If so, let us know in the chat box. How have you heard of it? Do you use it at work? If you do, what's the context? Have you had training on it? Just tell us in the chat box a little bit about your experience of VUCA. Those of you who may not have heard the term, again, it's not a history lesson, but if you haven't heard the term, it actually, I guess, was first adopted by the US Army as long ago as to describe the conditions after the Cold War ended. And the conditions that they used, the words they used to describe those post-Cold War era, is volatility. Things are happening, and this applies equally now, but it's interesting that this is not a new thing. This is not a new label that's being used to describe Industry 4, but it's certainly a label that is used to describe the nature of change right now. It's volatile. Things are changing so fast, but not necessarily in a predictable trend. Just changing so fast, there's often no chance to predict or look backwards to see, is it repeating itself? Have we seen this before? It's uncertain. Major changes are happening, and we can't draw on past experience to help us understand them. Again, without going into all of the detail, you've just got to think about world events, political, social, environmental events that are happening at the moment, and the uncertainty that is bringing to us as individuals and also to us as businesses. So it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex. Some of the decisions that we've been asked to take are hugely complicated in that there are several possible right answers. Of course, many of the decisions that we make are also, may I call them routine, but perhaps more predictable. We don't always make big, complex decisions, but some of the problems that we're facing in industry at the moment are most certainly complex. There's so many mitigating factors to take on board. Which takes me to the last point. VUCA also means that the nature of change is ambiguous. You look behind it and you think, well, actually several things might have caused this. It's difficult to pull out some cause and effect type analysis is more difficult now. So, and again, that doesn't apply to all problems or all situations, but it certainly describes many of the challenges that businesses are facing at the moment. So this nature of change is VUCA. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. And I'm going to come back to that later in this session too. But of course, as I've said, this first started drawing life in the US Army after the Cold War. So we know we don't need VUCA to tell us that change is often difficult. And I think we just have to look back in our own past history to see evidence of why change can be so difficult. Again, let me have your comments in the chat box because I would love your experience of this. What's your experience of why change initiatives have failed in your business in the past? Because I've certainly worked with many change projects that have not delivered what they wanted to deliver at the outset. They may have had limited success, or they may have been dropped and not seen through to fruition, or as the slide says, there may be several reasons that drive the failure of change. So the nature of change is VUCA, but the nature of change is, some would say, 80% of change initiatives fail. Now that is a staggering figure, but it is what many of the researchers say. And one of the researchers I particularly enjoy reading in this area is John Cotter. You can see that the slide is sourced to him. He is one of the ones who says 80% of change initiatives fail from his research. Why? Because there's complacency. We haven't got enough energy or momentum to keep driving it forward. We haven't created enough allies, enough supporters. We haven't got our stakeholders on board. We've underestimated the need for a vision, to show people why the change is necessary and what the benefits of it are. We've under-communicated it. Cotter goes so far as to say you cannot over-communicate in change. You do it again and again and again, and when you think you're finished, you do it some more. We've allowed obstacles to build up. We haven't, if you like, had a pre-mortem. What could go wrong and how we're going to go around it? Or we've allowed the obstacles to knock us off course totally. And interestingly, and again, we need to remember this in this VUCA environment, more certainly, its change can be difficult. It can take a long time. And during the period when you are asking people to change whatever it is you're asking them to change, look for the short-term wins so that you have something to celebrate, energize, motivate as we're going through. And there's some really interesting comments coming through. Forgive me if I don't read all of them out. I'm looking at the slide. I'm also looking at the chat box. Rob, as I said, will draw my attention to anything in particular if I do miss it. But yeah, no buy-in, Ramon. John, leaders don't connect. People simply don't like it. I'm going to come back to that, Isabel. It's a good point. People feel powerless, lack of leadership. There's definitely a theme going on there, isn't there? Simon, seen change initiatives change because they didn't involve the end users. Yep. Okay, so you haven't had the right allies on board in the first place. The right people haven't been involved. There's some fabulous comments there. And as I say, forgive me if I don't read them all out, but you can be reading them as I'm talking through the slides. Because again, reading experiences that your colleagues in this session have had is really useful knowledge sharing too. So let's carry on. So
Liz.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure.
I think David's asked, can you define failure in your statement that 80% of change results in failure? Can you define where you got that from? I think he's asking.
Yeah, okay. It comes from Cotter's research, David. Thanks for the question. But I think your key question is, how would you define failure? And he defines it as it doesn't achieve what it was set out to achieve in the first place. So, and it's interestingly enough, and you don't have to read books, by the way. I don't know whether people in the audience want to read books, but you can Google Cotter and get access to some of his many articles on the subject. One of the reasons he says, and how he defines failure, is even if the change project gets through to fruition, it delivers, if you like, end of project, job done. There's not enough time and attention then paid to make sure that the culture reflects what the change initiative was meant to achieve. In other words, old habits come back. Yeah. So there's no project measurement to make sure that the change has succeeded. That's what we mean by it. Thanks for the question. Keep them coming. So, VUCA, we know from our past experience, and you've got lots of experience on this, but I think in my mind there's obviously a third dimension to change as well. And I guess it's perhaps a statement of the obvious, but I want to state it. Not all change is the same. And often the change that we find most difficult are those that are represented in the top half of that rectangle. When you're bringing companies together, when you're bringing cultures together, when you're downsizing, when you're closing, it's obvious that these can be difficult, challenging changes. And of course, the less difficult are perhaps what you might regard the more positive: investment, growth, opportunity. But you know, it's interesting that even those, what you might call the positive changes, can bring barriers, and I'm going to look at those in a moment. Again, let us know in the chat box what's been your experience here. What's been your most difficult change that you've been involved in, either as a change champion, as a change manager, or perhaps as being part of the change that's been done to you. You know, it's easy to see that often failure is associated with where you're really having to change people's deeply ingrained culture, values, behaviors. But sometimes that can come through good news as well. I mean, it's really interesting. I've seen people and I've heard people say, thank heavens we've been bought out. Now we're going to get the investment that we need to grow. And you hear that statement and you think, fabulous, they're going to be really open to the change. And then their behaviours don't demonstrate that. I've actually been involved with companies who've done it, who've seen it, who've witnessed it. I've helped people through it. And even therefore, and I think this is a really interesting thing for us all to consider, we may be excited about Industry 4 and change opportunities, but still have barriers to it. Let me know what you think. Still have barriers to it. And as some of you have already mentioned in the chat box, your experience reflects what is on the slide there. Many barriers are through misinformation, lack of leadership, lack of trust, the things that you have said in the chat box. So I don't think I need to read all of those out. But the thing I'm putting out now is the thing for you to consider is you still see these barriers. Sometimes it's very individual, of course, but you still see these barriers with some people when you think the change is a positive thing. And the story I'm sharing there, real story, true story of a big team of people who were merged with another. They thought it was a good thing, and they were still demonstrating behaviours that weren't terribly helpful. So knowing that these barriers exist, I guess the key thing is what can we do about them? So let's move away now from what is the nature of change through to, okay, we get that, what can we do about it? So here's some of the things that I want to share with you. Again, in the chat box, you let me know what you think in your experience has worked for you. But the first thing I want to do, and I'm going to go on to this in the next slide, is understand the human reaction to change. Again, some of you have mentioned that. That's what one of the things we can do about it is actually understand if it's perceived as negative or if it's perceived as positive, we can still react to it. We have to then, of course, acknowledge and plan to address the concerns that people are sharing, or maybe not sharing, because they may be keeping them to themselves, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I think we have to meet VUCA with VUCA. So, yeah, we know VUCA describes the turmoil that change can bring, good or bad, and we can meet it with VUCA. We have to take care of the process. You don't need me to tell fellow engineers how important process is, but I'm going to come back to it again because it is so crucial when we're talking about significant change. And we have to be a more human leader. And that's a phrase that I've actually taken from Schwab and Sawani, who I mentioned earlier, because to me it summarizes the behavioral change that we as leaders need to demonstrate to help people through the significant change that is coming to them. And when I say we as leaders, I mean every single person here today with me. Whether you're a formal leader or not, you're a leader, you're a self-leader, you demonstrate leadership capabilities with your colleagues in whatever capacity you're working in, and we all have to demonstrate those more human leadership characteristics. One of which is helping people build resilience. So I'm going to focus on that one later because I think there are many behaviours that are key. I think building resilience is arguably one of them, which is why I'm going to focus on it. But let's start with this one, the human reaction to change. Again, some of you may have seen this curve. You may have seen it drawn a little bit differently. It doesn't matter how it's drawn particularly. But it is represented, first developed, if you like, from, you'll see at the bottom of your screen towards the right there, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And it was Kubler-Ross who first invented this term change curve. And she started her work actually looking at emotions that people go through when they are experiencing significant personal change. So her focus was during periods of bereavement. She looked at periods of significant personal change. It could be death, divorce, a major life change in some way. But her work was so groundbreaking that it was very quickly adopted by organizations who could see that this applied in organizations too. As I said, many of you may have come across this before, but I'm going to talk very quickly through it. Let me start with the two axes. You can see there's a horizontal axis is time. The vertical axis should have motivation written on it, but you could also write energy there. It says this basically, very briefly. Something significant happens, and I'm going to talk about work now. I'm not going to talk about Kubler-Ross's first research, but something significant happens to you at work. So it's not the sort of change that says, I don't know, will you sit at this desk today rather than that desk that you sat at yesterday? Yeah, some people may not like that, but I'm talking about bigger change than that. So I'm talking about, a change in the customer that you've been given to work with, a change in merging with another department, a change in a big process that you've become very familiar with, a change in a product that you're working on, or buyouts, acquisitions, etc. Something significant to you happens. Very often, our first reaction is shock and denial. I'm going to go very quickly through this. Shock and I can't believe this is happening. They've said for ages that they're going to change this, and they won't follow through. It won't happen. Shock, denial. Can't believe it. After a period of time, and this is very individual, as the bullet point says. So somebody may go through that shock and denial in minutes. Others may take hours, days, or months, depending on the individual and the size of the change. But the next phase of feelings that you'll go through is anger. How dare they? I really don't like this. Nobody consulted me. They haven't even asked our opinions. It may be outspoken, or it may be hidden. So, and this is a really interesting thing, when you're working with people during change periods, it's not just the outspoken who are feeling these things. So some people may be passively angry, some may be outwardly angry, but anger will manifest itself in one way or another. You then drop through to the bottom of the curve, and the word used there is depression. At work, it might be lack of morale. It might be low energy. It might be depression, or it might be anxiety. It might be feeling a bit more stressed. So whichever word you want to use, you get the pattern. Something has changed. You can't believe it. You get to believe it, and you're angry with it, and then you feel low about it. It's only as you start coming up the curve that your motivation and your energy will be re-engaged. Yeah, you'll feel like you did before. And when you start coming up the curve, you're entering into a period of acceptance until you finally are on board with the change in integration. So these are predictable stages that most people go through when they are experiencing significant change. As the bullet point says, how you perceive it, how you react may be different to the person next to you. Depends on you as an individual, depends on the size of the change, as I've said. Moving forwards is the key thing. Very often people get stuck at the bottom of the U there, in that anxiety, low energy, low morale, depressed phase. That's very high risk. That is when you can lose people to an organization. And you know what's worse is if you don't lose them to an organization, if they stay there and they never get out of that low bit, it's terrible for them and it's not good for the organization too. So moving forwards is key, and that's where we can help each other, and I'm going to look at that in a moment. But before I move off the slide, just remember you can move backwards on this too. So you can start going through a change. You can think, oh, okay, I'm beginning to get my head around it. I can see there's some possibility here. That's leading you into acceptance. And then your manager does something that blows it right out of the water for you. And you go backwards and you think, how dare they again? So, yeah, absolutely. I'm just looking at Tony's last comment there. Absolutely, Tony. It is so sad when people, and so bad for their mental health. Is there a feel for the percentage of losses? Do you know, I don't know the answer to that, and I think it's a great question. Intuitively, I would say it's a lower percentage now than it has been previously, because we are so used to change now. We may not still like all of it. It may still be handled badly, but because we're more used to it, I would say the percentage is decreasing, but I don't have a figure for that percentage. So the important thing is, how can we help ourselves and how can we help others? And the curve has changed here. Doesn't matter. Don't get hung up on the shape of the curve. What I want us to focus on is, in order to help ourselves, because this applies to us as it does to others as well, and to help other people, it is, as we're going through the stages, this is what we need to do. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. As you are in denial, because you've got to recognize this in yourself as well, as you see colleagues in denial, do what the slide says. Give them information. Confirm it, this is going to happen, but this is what we can expect, and this is the process we're going to go through to help get ourselves to where we need to be. So whatever words you want to use, that denial stage, what helps people there is having the information, knowing what the future holds, the vision, if you like. It is going to happen, you can't deny it, and how they're going to be supported through it. When people start moving through to resistance, and remember this can be angry, let them vent. And I don't mean you don't need to put up with aggressive behaviors. You don't need that at work. No one does. But let someone express how they're feeling and listen to them. And this is one of those human qualities that I think we need to do even more of in organizations. Listen, empathize. Don't sympathize, empathize. acknowledge their feelings because they're genuine and they're right for them. This is their perception. Respond to their concerns. I'll come on to that in a moment. Remind them of reality. Again, people have got to know, look, it is happening. But this is where you give time to people. If you are a change leader, if you are a project manager in charge of driving a significant change, when people start showing resistance, take it as at least they're moving through the curve. Very often we get angry in return. What's the matter with them? Give them time, give them support, empathize, listen to them, because that will help them move through the curve. And you'll know they're moving through the curve because they'll start asking you more questions. They're beginning to explore a little bit. So when they're exploring, well, remind them of what some of the priorities are. Remind them of what the project plan is to help keep them focused. Maybe give them some short-term goals to work on. Maybe involve them. What do you think? Organize meetings where they can start giving ideas. Know that they might slip back and get angry. You'll listen, you'll empathize, but keep on involving them so that you do get them to commitment. Integration, as the previous slide called it. And when they're there, they've accepted it, they're working with it. Celebrate success. Tell them job well done. And at the risk of overcomplicating it, but I can't talk about the change curve without mentioning this, remember what VUCA does for us at the moment, and Industry 4, and the nature of change as I've described it, is that you may well be managing through several changes at work at the same time. So change your process, change your location, change of manager, change of targets. These may all be happening at the same time, and you may be on different places on the curve for different changes. It's one of the things that really does underpin that complexity of change that is mentioned in VUCA. But you can recognize these behaviors in yourself and in others if you look for them, if you observe them. And the key is how then to help people through it, as I've said. So how can you recognize? Well, you can recognize through their behaviors, of course. Denial, what they say, anger, what they say, what they do, lack of motivation, drop in attendance, low morale. You can recognize it in all of those ways. And you can also recognize it because people will be asking for information. They'll be asking, well, what's in it for me? They may, and thank heavens when they do start asking, what do I need to do and when, because they're then getting into exploration. But they may challenge, what's the difference? What difference is this going to make? How can you prove to me that this will be better? People will also look for collaboration. Have you asked their opinion? Has your opinion been sought? And have I been supported? They're typical concerns that people experience when they're facing change, typical concerns. And you will see those through the behaviors that people demonstrate, the questions that they ask, the energy that they show. So there's a lot to think about, but you can improve your response to this by simply observing people and really listening to them. And I absolutely and totally believe that if you demonstrate the sort of, you give people information, you talk about what's in it for them, you ask their opinion, you show them support at each stages of the curve, what you're doing is entering their world, if you like. You're saying, look, I know you have concerns, I've acknowledged them, and this is what I'm doing about them. And I really do believe that entering their world, seeing it from their perspective, will get you a long way to ensure that your changes are successful. It's that human side will get you a long way. But it's not just what you have to do. So being human, acknowledging their concerns will get you a long way. But you also have to meet VUCA with VUCA. Now you'll remember volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. If you think, play VUCA back to VUCA. Volatility, how can you help with that? For every change you're involved in, talk about the vision. Talk about, and a vision is one of these often misunderstood words in organizations. You think it's something that just the executive team do. It isn't. It is for anything that you're working on. If it involves changing process, people, products, perceptions, talk about why, where you want to be, where you want to go, and use that as a focus for your actions. Things are uncertain, show understanding. I've already talked about this. Address their concerns. We are at a deep level wired to want stability, and we're not getting it in organizations at the moment. So as much as you can, show understanding that people are reluctant to live in such an uncertain environment. And you show that in every way you can, as I just talked about on the previous couple of slides. Understand what they might be feeling, what you can do to reassure and support them. Complexity. When you're managing situations that are so complex, remember I said so many variables, no right or wrong answer, so many causes may have different effects. Courage is really important here because it's about the courage of doing something. Maybe you don't actually know what 100% is the right answer, but doing nothing is almost certainly doomed to failure. So doing something is better than doing nothing. Of course, with considered, so courage could also be considered, I guess, with courage, but also with a considered viewpoint. You've thought it through as much as you can. So logic is very, very important here. Problem analysis is very important, but having the courage to actually do something is better than doing nothing when you've got real challenges. And the last A is adaptability. Be agile. Yes, collect all the data that you need, look for signs for things that are working, not working, and make adjustments accordingly. And make that part of your change program. You can set out your vision and you can have, well, you know this, you know it from an engineering point of view. Change processes share similarities, have milestones, look back, do post-mortems on the last part of the change project, do pre-mortems on the next part of the change project, and show your adaptability. I think the last thing I want to mention, I already mentioned it when I talked about the agenda, is resilience, and I'm going to come on to that in more detail in a moment. But what can we do about it? Yes, we can meet VUCA with VUCA. Yes, we can show understanding and adapt our behaviors, as I've already said. And we also, before I talk about resilience, we also need to have the right process. It's about having a plan. It's not hoping for the best. And I don't think for 1 minute any of you would do that. But by goodness, you do get involved in some changes where you think, have they actually planned this? Or have they rushed it? So, plan, don't pray. And there is so much research out there on this. I've already mentioned John Kotter. If you do like reading or you want to look at some articles online, John Kotter, it's the leading change is the nature of his seminal work on this. He talks about 8 steps towards leading successful change. So John Kotter is one. The other, if you want to make a note of it, I'd recommend is Dave Ulrich. That's U-L-R-I-C-H. I think yes, it is U-L-R-I-C-H. Dave Ulrich. He has written the Change Champions Field Guide. And lots of other change authors are out there as well. What we've done is synthesize their work. So the slide that you're seeing here, I guess, is the step-by-step approach according to IMechE, synthesized from our own experience and all of those research authors. So have a process. Whatever your project plan is, keep this process in mind during your project planning. You've got to have steps to create that energy for change. It's about creating urgency and desire, getting people to accept that it's needed and wanted. You have to have the vision. Vision doesn't have to be called vision. It can be called the end in mind. Clarify the map for people. Show them where they're going and how you're going to get there. Remember the word allies from a previous slide? Get small groups of stakeholders on board with you and align behind them. You're going to need them. And they don't have to be more senior people. They can be colleagues. They can be senior people as well, but just get others on board so it's not just down to you. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Listen, be available, particularly when people are in resistance. That left-hand side of the curve, if you remember, that is not the time to go on a business trip. That is not the time to go on holiday if you can possibly help it. Be there for people, communicate with them, face-to-face, in email, on change notice boards, on the intranet, in social media, work-related social media, whatever tool is at your disposal. And get on with it. And I think this is part of the courage that I've just talked about on the previous slide. Yes, do your planning, but don't do paralysis through your analysis. Get on with it, because sometimes energy is created by the momentum, seeing things happening. Don't underestimate the need to celebrate small wins to keep people engaged, whatever it might be. I'm not talking about massive budgets. You don't have them normally. So, you talk about, you buy pizza, you buy the coffees, you bake Friday cake afternoon, you say thank you, you have meetings to acknowledge what's gone well, you promote people. I don't mean position-wise, I mean you promote people in emails, you talk about what a good job they've done, all of the ways you can celebrate small wins. And remember that last step, where as you're going through the change, you review, you refine, etc., etc. But you cement. That was the word I wanted to get to. Remember we talked about what percentages fail and where that 80% came from? John Cotter, so many of us don't actually cement and make sure that the change has been embedded. So before I move on to the human qualities, which is where I want to go next, what have we talked about so far? Quick recap. Be aware of the change curve. Be aware of those typical people concerns. Meet VUCA with VUCA. Have a clear process. These are some of the things that you can do to make sure that your change, your transformations are successful. And you need to demonstrate those more human behaviors. And I'm going back to Schwab here. We need leaders who are able to model and champion cooperative working. They'll coach rather than command. They'll be driven by empathy, not ego. The digital revolution needs a different, more human kind of leadership. I really like that phrase. I think it resonates so much with me. Now, what does it mean? Well, it means for me, transformational, successful transformational change needs high levels of both leadership and management skills. Yes, you need to have good high levels of management skills because you need a project plan, you need steps, you need milestones, you need to know what success looks like, you need to do your measurement, and you need high levels of leadership skills too. You need to bring the, if I may call it this, the logic and the emotion together. That's being a transformational leader. in the context of transformational change. So and again, I'm sourcing Kotter, the 8 steps for leading change here, but you need high levels of both. And if you don't have high levels of both, this is where your allies, you're bringing a group of people together who can do some of the things that you can't do yet. Bring them together so that both are represented. It may be that you have a colleague who's good at talking to people. It may be that you're good at talking to people and getting them on board, but less so at project planning. Whichever way you play it, both of these skills are needed. High levels of these skills are needed for successful transformational change. I don't know whether this works for you. Very little summary, if you like. It's about getting the equation right. And if you have vision, but you don't have a right reason, a compelling reason, you will not get people motivated. So vision is, you know where you're going, but you can't articulate why you need to change. You know what you'd like to do, but you can't convince people of why it's important. No motivation. You won't get them on board. If the reverse is true, you know what needs to change and why it's a good idea, but you can't paint a picture of how the future will be better with this change. People are going to say, well, why? What's the point? What do we need to do it for? They're going to be confused. So, and I know these equations aren't mathematical, but in my mind, if you have vision and reason, and you then apply that with energy and you involve people, in my mind, you will get them motivated. You will have given them clarity of not only where they're going, but why they have to go there. So that lower one, if it works for you to summarize it this way, that's what can help you, in my opinion. VR plus EI equals will get you that motivation and clarity. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times that I want to talk about resilience, and I want to do that now. It's the ability to bounce back and move on from setbacks and challenging situations. That's my definition. That's what I'm going to be working with. So this ability to bounce back, ability to carry on in this VUCA environment that we live in Industry 4. As I'm doing this, why don't you share some of your own experiences in the chat box? Because you will learn from each other, and I know you will have some great tips to share. So look at the chat box, type in, what do you do to increase your resilience? How have you managed to bounce back from setbacks in the past? Learn from each other. And as you're doing that in the chat box, I'll carry on sharing some of the things that I think I want you to focus on. There are all sorts, by the way. I'm going to start with self-talk, but before we go into that, all you've got to do, if you're familiar with the concept of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, if you're not, Google it. You'll get all sorts of information about it. But you can build resilience in a number of ways. For example, and maybe some of these techniques you already use, NLP mindfulness will tell you that anchoring is a really useful way to build resilience. Anchoring simply meaning it's the connection between a stimulus and your automatic response. So it's best explained if I can say this to you. If you will hear a piece of music, maybe you'll hear a piece of music and it'll take you right back to where you were, who you were with, what you were doing, and it's a good, happy memory. That's an anchor. Maybe you'll taste certain food and it'll take you right back to your childhood, a happy place, a good time you're having with your family, your friends, whatever. That's an anchor. You can use anchors to help build your resilience because they help put you into a good mood. I haven't got time to go into detail, but if you're interested in the concept, again, just look up anchoring. Visualizing is a similar sort of thing. Anchoring will take you back to something that you've done in the past that will put you in a good mood. Visualizing will take you to the future. You do a strong visual image of how you want things to be. It's what athletes do all of the time. They see themselves crossing the finish line. They paint a strong picture of themselves crossing the finish line. They hear the audience applauding. They see the tape, crashing through the tape. It's a strong visual image which helps them get through their training and helps focus them. So all sorts of things. Self-talk is exactly what you think it is. It is what you tell yourself. Your mind and your body are connected. And if you tell yourself that you're going to fail, chances are that you will, because you're telling yourself your mind and body are connected. You're building yourself, you're psyching yourself up for failure, I guess. So the way self-talk works in such a positive way is, first of all, to identify that negative self-talk, then reframe it as a positive affirmation. So, if you feel yourself going into, you've got a presentation to do and you're thinking, oh, I can't do this, then you've got to reframe it. I can do this with practice. I will be confident when I've had 5 rehearsals. So you reframe it as in a positive way, to affirm, to give yourself a positive message. The things with self-talk that you've got to remember is you have to do them repeatedly. So give yourself an affirmation. If you think you're not a good at whatever, reframe it and keep on saying it to yourself, because the more your mind says it, the more it'll enter your subconscious, and that will drive your behavior. You'll begin to believe it. So as the slide says, over time, those positive affirmations will be accepted by your subconscious mind. It then acts in accordance with it. There's so much more I could say on this. But hopefully that's given you enough of a taster. And again, by all means, Google. You think I was an advert for Google, wouldn't you? I'm not, but it's such a useful resource. There are all sorts of books out there. You can go into any bookshop and find these NLP techniques to build resilience. The last thing I do want to share with you, though, is one of my favorite books. And this time I'm drawing from the work of Martin Seligman, and he has written a book called Learned Optimism, which is hugely important to help us build resilience. And remember why I'm talking about resilience? It is a key behavior that will help us through periods of transformation and help you deliver successful transformation by helping other people build resilience. Martin Seligman says this: there's 3 traps we fall into when something tough happens, like change. And we fall into the trap of personalizing it. We think, oh, this is all about me. Why are they doing this to me? And we fall into the trap of permanizing it. Things will never get better. Why is it always like this? Why do they do this to me? Why is my life so bad? Why is work so difficult? Why does my manager not understand? Permanence is about thinking a bad situation will last forever, and we know it won't, because we've seen through that change curve that majority of people do eventually get through. And the third P, that is a trap for resilience, it stops us being resilient, is pervasiveness. We think that something bad happens and it affects all areas of our life. Something bad happens at work and you carry it with you for the rest of that day, that evening, that week. You make it pervasive. So Seligman says, be aware of those 3 traps and make sure that your self-talk turns them around. It's not about you. Don't make it personal. It's not about you. Don't make it permanent. It won't last forever. Do think that it's isolated to one aspect of your life and doesn't affect all of the other aspects. It's not pervasive. So the trick is to turn it around. Really interesting work on how we can build resilience. I do recommend it to you. So let me just take a step back and summarize the many things that we have covered, and I know there's been a lot of things that we have covered today, but I'll start with a statement of the obvious. Change is the new normal. It can be characterized by VUCA. It can be met with VUCA, but it's the new normal. I do believe that the demands of Industry 4, this unknown world that we're getting into that can be so exciting for us, will require a new set of behaviours, and I'm calling them Leadership 4 behaviours, that more human kind of leadership. I think change is a paradox. I think it can be difficult and challenging. It can be stimulating, it can be rewarding, it can be all of those things at the same time. The only certainty is that it's ever present, and we know that. And the paradox extends to you may be positive about one, negative about another. Your colleague may feel differently about the same things. It's hugely individual. But we can, fortunately, draw on much research that says, whilst it's individual, there are typical patterns of behaviour that we go through, such that I have shared with you. And when we help people through those behaviours, we increase the chance of leading successful transformations. What else can we do about it? We manage the curve. We meet VUCA with VUCA. We have that rigorous process. People, hugely important. The most important. Process, hugely important. And what we can do about it is end, and I'm going to end here, become that more human leader, empathic, role, inspire, all of the things that it says there, build resilience. Because, basically we have three choices, I think, when we come to change. We can make change the villain and fight it, or we can tolerate it and just think, oh, it's part of working life, let's get on with it, or we can embrace it and really work with it. And I think when we do that, we'll be demonstrating that we want to grow, we'll be demonstrating a growth mindset, we'll also be demonstrating those more human behaviours that are good for us and good for other people too. Thank you for listening. Rob, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Liz. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you, everyone, for participating. There's been some excellent conversations going on in the chat box that I've been monitoring. If you'll see in the chat box now, you can see how you can get the recordings and the slides. If you click on or put in the URL to our learning management system, it's free to sign up. You just input your an email address and a password, and then you can have access to the slides. And that also includes any of the webinars that we've had in the past, which will include slides and videos from that. As you can see, we have how unconscious bias affects our decision. In the 25th of November is our next webinar. Along with that, we have a number of upcoming training programs, Leading Change, on the back of the 2020 dates coming soon, and then October we have a Senior Engineering Manager, and in December Chartered Managers Boot Camp in there. Liz, I've been looking in the chat box. There isn't a huge amount of questions related to it at the moment. There's some great conversations going on. I don't know if you want to have anything to sort of tidy up.
Okay, Rob. Yeah, thank you. I've just noticed, actually, I think somebody posed a question. I may have missed this earlier, Rob, though you did send it to me. What's the difference between empathy and sympathy? And that was a while back I mentioned those words. Empathy is showing that you understand. Well, I mean, I don't know what the dictionary definition. The definition, according to Liz Bennett, is empathy is showing that you understand. Sympathy is sharing their feelings. And I think that is different. You show you understand by rapport, listening, talking, giving time. Sympathy is feeling the anger with them or feeling depressed or whatever. Yeah. Hope that helps. If there are any other questions, I know we've only got 1 more minute to go, though I'm happy to stay online for a couple of minutes if anybody does have any other questions, or if somebody would like to give their definition of what empathy and sympathy is, I'd be open to that. But if not, I think we're there. Thanks, Rob. Okay, Rob, I think I've still got the mic, so I will end the session there. Please, thank you so much, everybody, for the many things that you've been talking about in the chat box. It's really great that you've been sharing those stories with each other. It's fabulous. Thank you. And please feel free to log out whenever you're ready. If you do have any further questions, though, Rob and I are going to stay here for another couple of minutes, so we're very happy to take them. But if not, our hour is up. Thank you for attending today and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.